I'm Charlie Phillips, 27, an accountant from San Antonio, Texas. I was abandoned at 4 months old. But the ultimate betrayal wasn't the neglect, it was today. My biological parents, strangers to me, filed a lawsuit accusing me of manipulating my late grandfather, Judge Cole, for his $3.4 million estate. The irony is a slap across the face. The fight has begun. This is the ultimate fight for legacy and love. But who was Judge Cole, and how did the love of her grandparents prepare Charlie for the ruthless battle ahead? My history with my biological parents ended the moment it began, 4 months after I was born. They simply left me on my grandparents' doorstep in Charleston. No note, no explanation, just silence. That silence was the first emotional debt I ever carried. But that doorstep wasn't an ending, it was where my real life began, under the loving protection of Judge Franklin and June Cole. Real life started there. Charleston became my sanctuary. My grandmother, June, taught me grace and gardening. My grandfather, Judge Cole, gave me the one thing my parents couldn't, unconditional presence. He didn't just house me, he invested in me. He showed up every single day. That consistent, quiet strength was the true inheritance they gave me long before the will. Presence is the true inheritance. Judge Cole was more than a grandfather, he was a mentor. What specific lessons about justice and ethics did this principled man instill in Charlie, and how did those exact lessons become the blueprint for her revenge? Judge Franklin Cole wasn't just a judge, he was my moral compass. His courtroom was famously fair, but his lessons were for life. He taught me the power of integrity, that principles aren't abstract, they're the measurable foundation of your character. He never spoke about my abandonment, but he showed me the opposite of neglect. He showed me the opposite. His mantra wasn't win, it was be right. He insisted that true justice wasn't about revenge, but evidence, accountability, and clarity. He'd say, Charlie, justice isn't a feeling. It's a structure built on facts. That lesson shaped my entire career as an accountant. I learned to use logic and proof to stabilize my emotional world. Logic stabilizes emotion. Every decision I made, from my first job to buying my house, was run through his ethical filter. He gave me the armor to fight the world. When my biological parents returned, seeking to violate those very principles, they underestimated the depth of his teaching. They forgot that a judge's legacy lives not in money, but in the children he raised. His principles were my armor. Charlie's parents abandoned her, but they didn't completely disappear. What were the specific, hurtful ways they chose to reappear in her life, and how did these brief, toxic encounters confirm that the $3.4 million lawsuit was always about their entitlement, not Charlie's manipulation? They didn't disappear forever. They were the intermittent visitors, checking in just enough to hurt. They'd show up at major events, not out of love, but obligation, often to brag about their own success. It was emotional drive-by parenting, a flash of presence, followed by years of silence. Obligation, not love. When they spoke to me, it was rarely to ask about my life. Instead, it was to criticize how my grandparents raised me, too soft. Too traditional. Not ambitious enough. They weaponized their abandonment, using their status as biological to justify their right to judge. The truth? They were simply auditing someone else's successful investment in me. Judgment, not kindness. These brief, toxic encounters were merely irritating, but their final interaction before the lawsuit was a terrifying, crystal-clear professional request. What exactly did Charlie's parents email her about? And how did that email confirm that their motives had always been purely transactional, devoid of any genuine parental interest? Years after the last judgmental comment, an email landed in my professional inbox. No, how are you? No happy birthday. Just a cold, hard inquiry. They wanted a confidential consultation on tax loopholes and ways to legally hide assets. They hadn't remembered my birthday since I was 10, but they remembered I was an accountant when they needed a financial fixer. Purely transactional contact. That email was the audit I needed. It was proof that they didn't see me as a daughter. I was a tool, an asset to be exploited for their gain. I realized the only emotional language they spoke was one of financial opportunity and self-interest. I deleted the email without replying. I knew then, if they ever returned, it would only be for the ledger, never for the relationship. The relationship was written off. Charlie had established her emotional zero-tolerance policy, but you can't build a life on avoidance alone. How did the principles of Judge Cole transform Charlie's pain into professional integrity? And how did her quiet, disciplined life unknowingly become the foundation for fighting the coming $3.4 million lawsuit? I learned early that the only person whose loyalty I could count on was myself. So, I built a life resistant to chaos. I took the judge's principles of fact-based integrity and applied them to my career. My professional life wasn't just a job, it was my fortress against their instability. I earned my credentials with ruthless precision. Building my own fortress. Every professional success was a quiet, internal victory over their neglect. I was proving, both to myself and to the memory of my grandparents, that their investment wasn't wasted. I lived by the anti-neglect principle: show up fully, be reliable, and honor your commitments. This quiet determination gave me true power, the kind they never understood. True power is reliability. Charlie was professionally armored, but the scars of her past were still tender. How did the deep emotional wound of her abandonment manifest in her adult life? And how was this quiet resilience immediately threatened the moment she learned about the $3.4 million lawsuit? The abandonment didn't leave a visible bruise, but a deep, internal scar tissue. Even as a successful accountant, I struggled with the fear of being disposable. I fought the feeling that if I wasn't perfect, the people I loved would also leave. My hyper-professionalism was an armor built over the wound of a 4-month-old baby. Perfection was my self-defense. I transformed that pain into quiet resilience. I never let my guard down, professionally or personally. I convinced myself I was strong because I didn't need anyone. But sometimes, strength is just avoidance. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I had unconsciously minimized my vulnerability, which made true connection harder to build. Strength can hide a wound. Then came the lawsuit. It didn't just target the money, it targeted the core of the wound. The accusation of manipulation was an attack on my integrity, the one thing my grandparents healed and built. The abandonment wasn't over, it had merely evolved into a legal, financial assault. The emotional wound, the one I thought had healed, was instantly ripped open. The wound was ripped open. The lawsuit was filed, and the $3.4 million was on the line. What specific, devastating details did her parents use in court to twist Charlie's relationship with her beloved grandfather? And how did the sheer scale of the betrayal leave Charlie questioning the very meaning of the justice her grandfather taught her? Losing Judge Cole was the greatest pain. The reading of the will wasn't about money, it was about his final act of love. He left the entire $3.4 million estate to me, Charlie Phillips. It was confirmation that his loyalty was always with the child he raised, not the adults who ran. I felt an overwhelming flood of gratitude and peace. Peace before the storm. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. That's how long it took for the legal papers to be filed. My parents, the ones who had been absent $3.4 million worth of my life, were suing me. They filed a motion claiming I exerted undue influence and manipulation over an elderly man. Their sense of entitlement was so vast, it transcended basic human decency. Entitlement has no limits. This wasn't just about the money. This was an attack on my integrity, on the very man who saved me. My grandfather's legacy was his principles, and they were trying to smear it. I realized the revenge wasn't mine to seek, but his legacies to protect. I immediately retained counsel. This was war, fought with evidence and cold logic. The battle lines were drawn. The parents' legal claims were scandalous enough, but when the media got hold of the story, they turned Charlie's life into a public spectacle. What specific, humiliating accusations did the media print, and how did this public attack force Charlie to fight not just for her inheritance, but for her reputation? My parents didn't stop at the courtroom. They took the fight to the front page. Their lawyer was strategic, feeding the media a vicious narrative: Charlie Phillips, the adopted orphan, exploiting an elderly man with declining mental health. They painted me as a manipulative gold digger who swooped in to seize assets. They weaponized my abandonment against me, a calculated, cruel move. My name was mud. The humiliation was searing, but it brought clarity. My whole life was built on integrity, thanks to Judge Cole. This wasn't just about $3.4 million anymore, it was about defending his and my truth. I was fighting to prove that my professional life and my moral grounding were real. Not a charade for financial gain. I wouldn't let their opportunistic greed rewrite my life's ledger. Truth is the only defense. With the trial fast approaching, Charlie had to prepare for the fight of her life. What specific, forgotten lessons about truth and evidence did she have to recall from Judge Cole's past teachings, and how did these legal principles become her only shield against the emotional onslaught of facing her parents in court? The night before the trial, I wasn't studying the current case files. I was seeking counsel from the past. I opened my grandfather's worn law books. His margin notes were my guide. He wrote, "Charlie, emotion clouds the judgment. Trust the facts to speak for themselves." My professional training was his legacy. I had to audit my feelings and present the unshakable evidence. Facts over feelings. My parents were dealing in drama and distortion. I would deal in gap and ethical clarity. My defense was simple. The integrity of the will was inseparable from the integrity of Judge Cole's life and mine. My legal team's strategy, inspired by my grandfather, was to use my perfect financial records and his sound mind assessment as the shield. No counter-slander, just cold, hard proof. Integrity is the best defense. Despite the professional focus, the emotional gravity was immense. Facing them wasn't a deposition, it was a reenactment of the abandonment. My fear wasn't losing the money, it was the public validation of their rejection, the final sentence that I was never enough. The adrenaline was pumping, but it was fueled by decades of unresolved grief. Grief fueled the fight. I remembered him telling me once, "Charlie, when the opposition gets personal, it means they lack evidence. Focus on the paper trail, not the pain trail." He was telling me that my training was my defense. I needed to see my parents not as emotional aggressors, but as failed plaintiffs. The money was just the battlefield, the real victory was dignity. Dignity is the real victory. I got dressed in the most professional armor I owned. I wasn't Charlie the abandoned daughter, I was Charlie Phillips, CPA, the inheritor of Judge Cole's ethical legacy. The courtroom was my professional stage, and I was prepared to present the facts of their abandonment versus the facts of my grandfather's love. I was ready to face the emotional collapse, knowing it was the last battle to win. The professional stage awaits. Charlie was prepared for the legal fight, but the sight of her parents in the courtroom triggered a painful, immediate emotional breakdown. What exact memory of childhood rejection flooded Charlie's mind in that tense moment? And how did she manage to pull herself back from the brink of total collapse before the trial even began? I had prepared for the facts, the figures, and the legal arguments. I had armored myself against their lies. But the sheer reality of seeing them, 2 feet away, was a physical shock. My professional armor instantly cracked. They weren't just plaintiffs seeking money, they were the historical figures of my deepest pain, framed and displayed in a legal setting. The shield shattered. I felt the blood drain from my face. A specific memory flooded back, my 4th birthday party. My grandparents invited them. They were an hour late, stayed 10 minutes, and left without saying goodbye. That sudden, unannounced departure, that's what this lawsuit felt like. The abandonment cycle was completing itself. But this time, it was a public execution. Abandonment replayed. I wasn't the 27-year-old accountant anymore. I was the small child staring out the window, asking why. Why was I never enough to make them stay? That question, 23 years later, was being asked again in the most expensive, devastating way. My lawyer, Amelia, placed her hand on my arm. A quiet signal, stay professional. But the emotional gravity was pulling me under. Grief threatened the logic. I fought for control. I focused on the cold marble of the floor. Fact. Evidence. Structure. These were Judge Cole's words. I realized that if I gave in to the grief, I would be handing my parents the victory they craved, the emotional destruction of the person their father chose. My collapse would validate their claim of entitlement. I couldn't let my pain betray my grandfather's faith. Pain cannot win. I inhaled sharply and returned to Charlie Phillips, CPA. The wound was still there, but the armor was resealed, reinforced by decades of professional discipline. I looked at the judge, not Judge Avery, but Judge Cole in my mind, and made a silent promise: I would not bow to emotion. I would fight for his justice, using the tools he gave me. The collapse was over. The trial was about to begin. Focus on the facts. The emotional battle was won, but the legal war was just starting. In the next segment, Charlie recalls Judge Cole's teaching: justice never bows to emotion. How did this core principle give Charlie the ultimate resolve to fight back, transforming her from a vulnerable child into a calculated, principled opponent? Just as the bailiff called the court to order, the storm inside me subsided. I heard my grandfather's voice, clear and stern, cutting through the chaos: Charlie, justice never bows to emotion. Emotion demands revenge, justice demands truth. He wasn't talking about the law, he was talking about life. My inner child wanted to cry. My adult self, the accountant, knew I had a job to do. Truth over tears. They wanted my emotional pain to be their evidence, proof that I was unstable enough to manipulate a dying man. I decided to fight them with the most powerful tool Judge Cole gave me: cold, hard logic. I wasn't going to tell the court how much they hurt me. I was going to show the court the exact dollar amount of their abandonment and hypocrisy. Logic is my weapon. My new objective was not self-pity but dignity. I had to redefine the case. It wasn't about who deserved the money, it was about the integrity of Judge Cole's last decision. I focused on Amelia, my lawyer, who gave me a nod of approval. She knew I was ready. The child who was left behind had finally grown into the professional who was ready to fight back. Dignity over despair. I saw the empty space where my grandfather should have been sitting, presiding over the court. And I made a silent vow. I would treat this lawsuit with the same cold, fact-based reverence he treated every case. This was my final duty to him, to ensure his principles won out over the transactional greed of my biological parents. He deserved that honor. Honoring his legacy. Judge Avery entered. The room felt both sterile and intensely electric. I stood tall. My hands were steady. I wasn't just standing up for the money, I was standing up for every abandoned child who found shelter in the love of a chosen family. The time for feeling sorry for myself was over. The time for fighting with dignity and evidence, the only way Judge Cole ever taught, had finally come. The fight begins now. I gave Amelia a brief nod, a silent signal that my personal turmoil was locked away. I was ready to execute the strategy. Their argument was based on character assassination, ours was based on the paper trail of their financial neglect of Judge Cole. They thought they were facing a grieving orphan. They were about to face an accountant who specialized in exposing financial deception. Exposing the truth is my job. My parents looked smug, confident that their biological claim and media narrative would prevail. They had no idea they were about to be audited by a 27-year-old professional who lived by the rulebook they repeatedly violated. They thought I was fighting for $3. 4 million. They were wrong. I was fighting for the last word in a narrative they tried to write for me. The truth was about to be heard. The trial has begun. The parents' lawyer is about to deliver a brutal, theatrical opening statement, twisting Charlie's life story into a narrative of greed. What did the lawyer say that was the most painful, calculated lie, and how did Charlie maintain her composure, armed only with the memory of her grandfather's calm assurance? Mr. Harrison, their lawyer, strode to the podium, radiating confidence. His voice was smooth, his message venomous. He began by painting me as a master manipulator. This is a classic tale of a clever outsider who saw a multi-million-dollar opportunity in a family tragedy and exploited the declining health of an old man. He made it sound like I was an interloper, not a granddaughter. Venom on a velvet tongue. His most painful, calculated lie cut straight to my core. He said, Charlie Phillips convinced Judge Cole that his own children had abandoned him, thus poisoning his relationship with his rightful heirs for her own financial gain. He was twisting my trauma, their actual abandonment, into my motive. I felt a scorching wave of internal rage. Twisting the knife. I locked eyes with Amelia, then with the wall behind the judge. I remembered Judge Cole's calm assurance. The true professional never lets the opposition bait them into an emotional argument. My hands were sweaty, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. I was an observer, an accountant, auditing a faulty narrative. I couldn't grant them the spectacle of my breakdown. Neutrality is my strength. My parents watched me, clearly expecting a reaction. A flicker of pity, a nervous tear. They got nothing. I sent them a silent promise. You filed the legal paperwork. I will honor it. I will not fight with emotion, I will fight with the paper trail of your hypocrisy. Their attempt to assassinate my character had failed. They only succeeded in galvanizing my professional resolve. No tears, only resolve. Mr. Harrison finished his dramatic performance, leaving the air thick with prejudice. Then Amelia rose, calm and authoritative. The courtroom was ready for our response. Their story was a narrative of greed, ours was a narrative of facts, of love, and of the judge's unwavering trust in integrity. The emotional attack was over. Now, the accountant's revenge, precise, documented, and lethal, was about to begin. Lethal precision is the plan. The time for truth has arrived. What critical, undisputed piece of financial evidence did Charlie's lawyer present first, and how did this initial, cold, hard fact immediately shatter the parents' entire narrative of entitlement? Amelia didn't engage with the emotional drama. She went straight to the ledger. This case isn't about emotional manipulation, it's about financial fact. She spoke Judge Cole's language. Her first, critical move was to establish the financial independence of my grandparents, proving they weren't in need of a fixer. They built their wealth long before I became a CPA. Facts are stubborn things. Then came the hammer blow. Amelia presented canceled checks and tax records proving my biological parents paid zero in child support or shared expenses for 23 years. Not one bill. Not one medical cost. That was the undisputed piece of financial evidence that shattered their entitlement narrative. They claimed the rights of parents but bore none of the responsibilities. The $0.00 reality. My parents' faces went from self-assured to ash. They were now plaintiffs in a case about the integrity of parenthood, not just the validity of a will. They were forced to publicly confront the paper trail of their own callousness. The moment the $0 was displayed, the emotional case they were trying to build crumbled. You can't claim love when the ledger proves zero investment. Zero investment, zero claim. Amelia then reinforced the truth by showing Judge Cole's final legal notes. She presented his meticulously detailed journals, proving sound mind and clear intent in his final years. He didn't forget his biological children, he consciously chose to disinherit them based on their consistent, documented neglect. Amelia summarized the truth. The will is simply an accurate reflection of the family structure Judge Cole honored and the family structure the plaintiffs abandoned. Conscious choice, not confusion. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. The emotional tide had turned into a factual dam. I felt a surge of professional pride. My revenge wasn't loud or theatrical, it was the quiet, undeniable power of the ledger. I fought the chaos of abandonment with the structure of accounting. Amelia concluded, the defense rests on the facts. Judge Cole was of sound mind, and Charlie Phillips was his chosen, documented heir. The facts prevailed. The defense's logic was unassailable, but the ultimate judgment still lay with the court. What critical legal ruling did the judge deliver that not only ended the $3.4 million case but also publicly affirmed the validity of Charlie's chosen family over the biological one? The courtroom was silent. Judge Avery didn't look at the lawyers, he looked directly at my biological parents. His expression was one of profound disappointment. He began by addressing their key argument, undue influence. The evidence presented shows the deceased was of sound mind. Furthermore, the claim of influence suggests the plaintiffs believe parenthood is merely a biological title, not a duty. The duty of parenthood. Then came the critical legal ruling that shattered their case entirely. Judge Avery stated, the defense has overwhelmingly proven that the plaintiffs abandoned their parental duties, both physically and financially, for the duration of the defendant's life. He ruled that the will was valid and dismissed the case with prejudice. The $3.4 million estate belonged to me. A wave of relief, cold and immense, washed over me. Justice for the abandoned, Judge Avery then delivered the final, most personal blow, affirming the validity of my chosen family. He concluded, the integrity of a will should reflect the integrity of one's life. Judge Cole's life was dedicated to his family, and the defendant, Ms. Phillips, was clearly the only person who honored that bond. Chosen love is validated. The sight of their faces, stripped of their smug entitlement, was my only true moment of revenge. My mother was livid, my father defeated. They lost not because of a legal loophole, but because of the cold, hard facts of their own moral bankruptcy. They had tried to audit my life, but in the end, they were the ones who were audited and publicly declared insolvent of love and duty. The true cost of neglect. I didn't celebrate. I simply packed my papers, the accountant's final, cold gesture. I looked at the $3.4 million estate not as wealth, but as the final, documented affirmation of Judge Cole's trust. I walked out of the courthouse and left the weight of their rejection behind. The case was closed. The emotional ledger was finally balanced. The ledger is balanced. Charlie won her inheritance and her reputation, but what happened next was the ultimate, cold-blooded revenge executed by a CPA, a final financial maneuver that proved she was done with her biological family forever. What exact, devastating legal document did Charlie file the very next day, and how did that document ensure her parents would never, ever financially benefit from her life again? The courtroom emptied fast. My parents and their humiliated lawyer scrambled out. Amelia looked ecstatic, but I felt only a cold sense of completion. It's over, Charlie. You won, she whispered. But I shook my head slightly. The legal battle was over, yes. The $3.4 million was secure, but the ultimate, final score had not yet been settled. This was justice, revenge required a precise audit. Justice is temporary, revenge is final. I didn't go home to celebrate. I went to my office. The courtroom victory only validated my grandfather's trust, it didn't fully dismantle the threat my parents represented. They were toxic assets, and I needed to decouple their potential future claims from my life with surgical financial precision. I needed to ensure that even the potential for future contact was neutralized. Neutralizing the threat. They taught me the rulebook of abandonment, that blood is a temporary shield, easily discarded. I taught myself the rulebook of the professional, that facts and legal structure can rewrite any biological claim. I found the legal path that would not only protect my inheritance but would formally and financially sever any and all legal ties to them, past, present, and future. Rewriting the biological claim. I remembered the judge's words when I first got my CPA license. Charlie, never leave a balance unresolved. Clear the ledger. I was applying his final lesson not to a company, but to my life. The $3.4 million was the asset, my parents were the liability. It was time to write them off, legally and permanently. I started drafting the paperwork, the most definitive legal document I would ever sign. Clearing the life ledger. This document wasn't a defense against a lawsuit, it was an offensive maneuver, a final strike delivered with the precision of an accountant. I knew exactly what I needed to file. It was a legal declaration that would forever sever my biological lineage for all matters of inheritance, liability, and future claims. They wanted the spotlight? They would get the paperwork, cold, boring, and utterly final. Final strike is a document. The next morning, I took the finalized document, a few pages of dense legal text, to the courthouse clerk. The air was fresh, the chapter was closing. When I signed it, I wasn't just affixing my name to a legal paper, I was signing my emancipation. I was legally validating the abandonment they started, turning their rejection into my protection. It was the ultimate, cold-blooded revenge. Emancipation is sealed. They had assumed biological ties guaranteed them a safety net, an entitlement that could weather any storm. I proved them wrong. I proved that integrity, when applied with professional rigor, is a more powerful inheritance than any bloodline. The revenge was simple, removing their ability to ever use me, or my assets, for their gain again. The balance was restored. Bloodline severed. The ultimate irony was that the document I filed, the petition for legal severance of parental rights, voluntary, was a formality they should have legally pursued years ago to acknowledge their abandonment. Now, I was using that same legal structure to cut them out of my life permanently. They asked for a fight, I gave them a final, non-negotiable legal audit. Legal formality for closure. I had secured the inheritance and defended my grandfather's memory, but the true prize was the final ownership of my own narrative. They could no longer use their title to claim emotional or financial leverage. I was finally, truly free. I walked out into the San Antonio sunlight, the weight of 27 years of conditional love lifted. The debt was settled. Final ownership. The courtroom victory was public. But the silent, final act of revenge was private, permanent, and perfectly executed. My parents wanted financial recognition for their biological ties. I gave them a formal, legal document that declared those ties non-existent. I was the one who had the last, non-negotiable word. The lesson? Never try to audit the life of a CPA. The CPA always wins. Charlie secured her freedom and her fortune with one devastating legal document. But what were the immediate, desperate consequences for her parents when they realized their worst nightmare, being legally erased from her life, had actually come true, and how did Charlie ensure the finality of her revenge was broadcast to the world? My parents thought their humiliation ended when the judge dismissed the case. They were wrong. The next day, they received certified mail, my petition for legal severance of parental rights, voluntary. This wasn't a warning, it was a non-negotiable legal audit, permanently clearing them from my life's ledger. The irony was devastating. They abandoned me, and now I was legally validating their choice. Legal erasure delivered. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. This document ensured they could never claim me as a dependent, or next of kin, or ever hope for future inheritance, liability benefits, or even hospital visitation rights. I used their own legal concept of abandonment to build an unassailable wall. Their worst nightmare, being legally erased from my life, had come true. I felt a cold sense of absolute, final closure. The wall is complete. To ensure the finality was broadcast to the world, I gave an exclusive interview to the San Antonio Express-News, allowing them to publish the non-monetary details. I didn't gloat, I simply stated the fact: my family is the one who raised me. The legal action simply reflects the reality of my life. My revenge was complete. Public humiliation was met with public, permanent erasure. The CPA always settles the debt. Revenge is public and final. Charlie has won. The money is secure, and her abandonment has been legally finalized. But what happened to the $4 million inheritance? Did Charlie quietly retire, or did she execute a final, monumental act of respect for Judge Cole's legacy, something that ensured the judge's principles would continue to benefit the entire community? Everyone expected me to disappear with the $3.4 million, to quietly retire to an island. They mistook the purpose of the fight. The money was never the prize, it was the mechanism to secure my identity and honor my grandfather's legacy. Wealth is temporary, but impact is permanent. I had an announcement to make that would finalize the true meaning of Judge Cole's will. Legacy over liquidity. I looked at the reporters and announced the establishment of the Judge Cole Integrity Fund. Its purpose: to provide scholarships for students pursuing careers in public service, specifically, those who are self-funded or have been disowned by their biological families but are pursuing ethical careers. The money would now serve the community he spent his life protecting. Paying it forward. I explained that I was simply following my grandfather's final instruction, which wasn't written in the will, but etched in his character: use your gifts to lift others. I was only the custodian of his money, not the owner. The $3.4 million wasn't intended to secure my early retirement, it was intended to continue his work, to support the chosen who seek justice and dignity. Custodianship, not ownership. I made it clear, my parents fought for money they believed they were entitled to because of biology. I fought to prove that my grandfather's choices, based on merit and true familial bond, were legally sound and morally superior. The $3.4 million became the final, resounding moral statement: chosen family always wins. The final moral statement. The ultimate, coldest revenge wasn't winning the money, it was using the money in a way that directly countered my parents' greed. They wanted it to fund their retirement, I used it to fund futures built on integrity, the exact opposite of their character. Every scholarship awarded, every life changed, would be a new line item in the ledger of their failure. A beautiful, ethical kind of financial vengeance. Ethical vengeance is served. I didn't retire. The CPA work continued. The Judge Cole Integrity Fund became a new client, requiring my professional rigor. I was finally using my accountancy skills for a pure, uncompromised purpose: to pay forward the unconditional love I received. The inheritance didn't buy me freedom from work, it bought me freedom to choose the most meaningful work. Freedom to choose. The resolution wasn't the sound of the gavel, it was the quiet knowledge that I had defended the truth and secured my place in the only family that ever valued me. My grandfather gave me wealth, but more importantly, he gave me the tools to defend my dignity. The noise of the lawsuit faded, replaced by the steady ticking of the clock, a new legacy, ticking on principle, not biological obligation. Principle over biology. My family revenge story wasn't about tearing them down, it was about building up the legacy of Judge Cole. He taught me that you define family not by blood, but by bond, and that true integrity is the greatest inheritance of all. The debt is settled, the fund is running, and the ultimate justice has been served. Integrity is the final inheritance. The family drama is closed, the funds are dedicated, and Charlie is truly free. But what became of the parents, stripped of their legal rights and publicly shamed? Did they vanish into obscurity, or did their desperate final act of communication with Charlie, a handwritten letter, reveal an unexpected flicker of regret? Find out in our final segment, The Price of Entitlement. After the fund was announced, my biological parents vanished from the media spotlight. Stripped of their legal standing and publicly shamed, their business ventures reportedly began to struggle. Their moral bankruptcy had finally led to their financial insolvency, a poetic kind of justice. They were forced to reckon with the price of entitlement. I didn't track them, I didn't care. They were simply a closed chapter in my life's audited report. Poetic financial justice. Several months later, a small, handwritten envelope arrived at my office. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my mother. The letter was their desperate, final act of communication. A pathetic attempt to puncture the unassailable legal wall I had built. Curiosity, cold and detached, made me open it. I needed to see if the ledger contained any final entry of regret. The final entry of regret. I skimmed the letter. It contained no apology for the abandonment, only complaints about their current financial distress and thinly veiled demands for family consideration. There was no unexpected flicker of regret, just the same relentless entitlement that had defined their lives. They mourned the loss of the money, not the loss of me. They still hadn't learned the lesson. No regret, only greed. I tore the letter in half and dropped it into the waste bin. The act was swift and emotionless. They wanted a family connection. I gave them a verdict based on their own conduct. My closure wasn't dependent on their regret, but on my action. The ledger was finally settled, not just legally, but personally. I was free to focus entirely on the real legacy, Judge Cole's fund. The CPA always has the last word. The CPA always has the last word. Charlie achieved the perfect revenge, securing her future and her grandfather's legacy. But for our final, emotional close, we have one lingering question. After everything, what did Charlie do with the one priceless, non-monetary item her grandfather left her, the one symbol of the love that truly mattered? And what final, beautiful lesson did she take from the judge's life? Find out in our conclusion, the last lesson. I had dealt with the money, the documents, and the legal erasure. But one thing remained. On my desk, amidst the spreadsheets, was the one priceless, non-monetary item my grandfather left me, his favorite, worn fountain pen. He had signed countless legal documents with it, including my adoption papers and his final will. It was the physical symbol of the love that truly mattered. The true priceless relic. I picked up the pen. It was heavier than I remembered. It smelled faintly of old ink and Judge Cole's leather chair. I didn't use it for work, it was too precious. My revenge was complete, yet I realized revenge wasn't the goal. The goal was securing the peace that his love had always promised. I took a clean sheet of paper and wrote the final line I needed to close the chapter. Peace over punitive action. The last lesson the judge taught me wasn't about law or accounting, but about life. I wrote the words he lived by: true integrity is the greatest inheritance of all. The money could be spent, the legal documents could be filed, but the principle remained. I had defended his legacy not with rage, but with the very integrity he embodied. This was my personal moment of vindication and emotional release. Integrity is the final win. The family revenge story was over. My biological parents faded into the history books of bad decisions. My life was now defined by the future I chose, not the past I survived. The foundation was growing. My focus shifted entirely from auditing the past to investing in the future. The inheritance was the launchpad, the pen was the compass, and integrity was the ultimate map. Investing in the future. So, what's the final accounting of this story? My parents got a legal verdict based on their zero investment, and I got a legacy based on unconditional love. It was the judge's love that bought me the time, the tools, and the legal right to finally choose my own family, my own future, and my own peace. And that, my friends, is how a CPA delivers the perfect family revenge. The end is the beginning. And that brings us to the end of Charlie's incredible story. If you've ever felt rejected by the family you were born into, hit that like button. But before you go, tell me in the comments, what is the most important lesson you learned from the ultimate financial takedown? Justice or revenge? The noise of the lawsuit had faded, the financial ledgers were cleared, and the legal chapter was closed. But before truly moving forward, there was one final, essential item on my emotional checklist, a visit to the one man who made it all possible, Judge Cole. The victory belonged to him, not to me. I drove to Fort Sam Houston, the grounds immaculate, the silence absolute. The final emotional audit. I found his headstone, simple and proud. I didn't bring flowers, I brought a small, rolled-up document. It was the certificate of incorporation for the Judge Cole Integrity Fund. I placed it at the base of the stone. The $3.4 million is working, Grandpa. Your legacy is officially protected and paying forward the integrity you taught me. It was a silent, formal declaration that his trust was not misplaced. The final delivery, I sat there, sharing the details of the trial with him, narrating the facts. I told him about the zero on the tax records and the legal severance that affirmed his love and their abandonment. I talked about the scholarship students who would now carry his name forward. It was the only place I could truly speak freely about the cold, hard facts of the victory and the warmth of the love that fueled it. Talking facts to the judge, the greatest irony was that my parents' greed hadn't just cost them the $3.4 million, it had cost them their final chance at reconciliation, their reputation, and any right to future involvement in my life. They exchanged a biological title for absolute, permanent isolation. I understood that true revenge isn't about inflicting pain, it's about delivering an unassailable legal verdict that reflects the truth of their character. Isolation is the true cost. I was no longer the abandoned child fighting for scraps of recognition. I was the CEO and chief accountant of my own life, managing a legacy of integrity. The CPA had achieved personal and professional emancipation. I stood there, not a victim of my past, but a product of Judge Cole's faith. The freedom I felt was profound, it wasn't purchased with money, but secured through legal action based on love. CEO of my own life. I took Judge Cole's fountain pen out of my bag. The priceless, non-monetary artifact. I gently laid it beside the certificate of incorporation. The pen that signed my freedom now rested with the man who wrote my destiny. This was my final, personal act of closure, a promise that the integrity he valued would continue to write new futures for others. The pen's final rest. I turned and walked away. There were no more ghosts, no more loose ends, and no more emotional debts. The path ahead was clear. I was a success story built on the foundation of fierce love and undeniable, documented facts. The revenge had healed me, transforming the pain of abandonment into the power of self-determination. My life was finally, completely, my own. The path ahead is clear. My parents had sought to steal a cash asset, but Judge Cole had gifted me an emotional legacy. He taught me that real family isn't found in a birth certificate, it's found in the pages of a contract signed in mutual love and respect. His $3.4 million was the cost of the legal war, but the ultimate prize was the realization of this truth. The Integrity Fund was the enduring monument to that love. Contract of love. I had worried for years that their rejection defined me. But my revenge, my legal, financial, and ethical counter-audit, proved that I was defined by the man who chose me. The pain of the past was now just data, logged and filed away. The revenge wasn't loud, it was the quiet confidence of knowing the final audit was clean. Every action had a consequence, and the ledger always balances. The clean final audit. So, what's the ultimate takeaway from the CPA's perfect revenge? It's simple: never underestimate the power of documentation, integrity, and chosen love. The court case was brutal, but the ending was beautiful. I won the right to define my own family. And I won the most important fight of all, the fight for my own self-worth. Perfect revenge delivered. That was Charlie's story of the $3.4 million inheritance and the CPA's perfect revenge. It proves that blood isn't thicker than a legal contract built on integrity. Now, what about your family's most jaw-dropping legal drama? Tell me in the comments, who was the chosen one in your family? And what was the unexpected twist that defied all expectations? People often ask me, was it justice or was it revenge? I say it was both, framed by the principles of an accountant. Justice was the judge's ruling on the validity of the will. Revenge was the final, devastating audit of their character. It wasn't about hate, it was about balancing the emotional ledger that had been in deep deficit for 27 years. The CPA doesn't just manage money, we manage truth. Truth management. For years, I felt like a contingent liability on the balance sheet of my biological family, something they hoped would go away. The lawsuit changed that. By using my CPA skills, I performed a hostile takeover of my own narrative. My grandfather's love became the initial investment. And the outcome was the capital appreciation of my self-worth. Hostile takeover of narrative. Judge Cole taught me that the most valuable inheritances aren't liquid. My non-monetary asset was his example of integrity. That pen, the one that signed my adoption papers, was a physical reminder that true wealth is the unconditional love you choose to invest in. I didn't need their blood, I needed his bond. And the legal system, finally, validated that bond over biology. Love over liquidity. When I tore up that letter from my mother, it wasn't an act of hate, it was the final, definitive write-off. It meant their debt to me, the emotional debt of abandonment, was finally zero. The final audit of my life was clean. I had closed the books on the past and opened a new one, based entirely on the Judge Cole Integrity Fund and my chosen path. The ledger is zeroed out. My advice to anyone facing toxic entitlement? Don't seek emotional revenge, seek documented, legal finality. Use the system, the facts, and your own professional rigor to create an unassailable border. Don't let anger pay your fees, let strategy pay your peace. It worked for me. The result is a life where my self-worth is non-negotiable and my future is fully funded by integrity. Strategy pays for peace. The story of Charlie, the inheritance, and the CPA's perfect revenge is complete. It's a testament that chosen love can rewrite any biological narrative. The greatest revenge of all? Living a life of principle. Now, I want to hear from you. Did Charlie's financial strategy give you a blueprint for handling your own family issues? Let me know which legal document you thought was the most devastating. Blueprint for revenge? It's been a few years since the dust settled. The $3.4 million is no longer just a number on a ledger, it's an engine for change. The Judge Cole Integrity Fund is fully operational, proving that fierce love and financial strategy can heal deep wounds. We've funded over a dozen scholarships for students who, like me, often had to choose integrity over blood and found their true family in their mission. The engine is running. I didn't just sign a check, I became the active custodian of the legacy. My CPA office now dedicates significant time to the fund. It's the most complex, most rewarding audit I've ever managed, auditing the impact of unconditional love. I meet with the students, ensuring they understand that this money is tied to a principle, not an obligation. They are the new chapter in the judge's story. Custodianship of love. The students, the board members, and my legal team, Amelia, they are the family I chose. They understand that the foundation is more than charity, it's a sanctuary for integrity, where merit trumps birthright. Every time a student thanks me, I feel the judge's silent approval. This community, built on shared values, is the ultimate, non-negotiable asset I fought for. Sanctuary of integrity. I conduct a personal audit every year. Assets, my self-worth, the fund's growth, Amelia's friendship, and the memory of the judge. Liabilities, 0. The financial ledger and the emotional ledger finally match. My parents are a memory of a bad debt, completely written off. The revenge was successful because it was a process of subtraction and replacement, subtracting toxicity, replacing it with purpose. Subtraction and replacement. The greatest irony? My biological parents' lawsuit, their desperate grab for cash, ultimately fueled a foundation that actively promotes the values they betrayed. Their greed became the unintended seed of Judge Cole's permanent, positive legacy. The $3.4 million wasn't just defended, it was weaponized against entitlement and dedicated to principle. A magnificent, self-balancing account of karma. Karma's self-balancing account. Real wealth isn't the number on the bank statement. It's the number of people whose lives you've positively audited. My inheritance wasn't the principle, it was the ability to generate a continuous stream of goodwill and positive human capital. That is the ultimate return on investment, something my biological parents will never understand because they measure life only in gross value. Positive human capital. Every step of my revenge was documented, filed, and legally sound. The final lesson is that the most powerful weapon against emotional chaos is professional rigor. The adoption papers, the will, the court transcript, the severance petition, these weren't just papers, they were the concrete evidence of my worth. They proved that facts, not feelings, define the law of the family. Rigor beats chaos. I never reconciled with my biological family, but I achieved a profound reconciliation with myself. That was the true prize. I reconciled my painful past with a principled future, using Judge Cole's tools. The keys I hold now don't just open my office, they unlock a life free from conditional love and entitled demands. The CPA's work here is done. Principled future unlocked. I am Charlie Cole, CPA. I am the woman who won a $3.4 million inheritance and used it to fight entitlement. My narrative is no longer a story of abandonment, but a blueprint for self-determination. I proved that the greatest revenge is to succeed on your own, uncompromising terms, honoring the love that built you. The family that chooses you is always the real family. Blueprint for self-determination. Thank you for following the saga of the judge, the inheritance, and the ultimate audit. The story is a loop. The judge gave, the parents tried to take, and the CPA restored. The legacy continues, one scholarship and one student of integrity at a time. If this story inspired you to balance your own emotional ledger, hit that subscribe button. What principle are you fighting for in your life? Legacy continues. I often look at this picture of me and the judge. It reminds me that this entire legal war wasn't about the money. It was a defense of the central, undeniable fact of my life. The contract of love is always superior to the contract of biology. My biological parents believed that blood was a non-negotiable asset. They were wrong. Blood is just a starting entry, bond is the ultimate, non-depreciating equity. Love over biology. My new definition of family has no room for passive investment. Family means actively choosing to show up. My parents' only contribution was a 0% equity stake and a huge emotional liability. The judge's investment, however, was 100% unconditional. Family is a mutual agreement to nurture, protect, and defend, a partnership in perpetuity. Active choice, not passive claim. I fought for legal validation of an emotional truth. The will, the adoption papers, the severance petition, these are the documents that define my lineage. The judge didn't just give me $3.4 million, he documented my belonging. I am legally the daughter of the man who loved me, and that legal fact is forever recorded. You can't argue with a final court transcript. Belonging is documented. I realized that the best revenge was internal. It was about achieving zero emotional dependency on the people who abandoned me. The $3.4 million secured my future, but the legal fight secured my peace. I no longer needed their approval, their recognition, or their regret. I had balanced my own books. Emotional closure is the only currency that truly matters. Zero emotional dependency. My legal action was a hostile takeover of my identity, transitioning ownership from my biological past to my chosen future. But the final result was a friendly acquisition of my life by my true self. The legacy of the judge is the ultimate collateral. I used their greed as the final tool to secure my freedom, turning a family tragedy into a blueprint for self-determination. Acquisition of true self. The biggest lesson? Never settle for the family you're given if it fails to uphold the contract of love. The true power is in the word chosen. I chose the judge's legacy, I chose integrity, and I chose my own family through the Integrity Fund students. That active choice gives me 100% equity in my own happiness, something blood could never guarantee. Power in the chosen. Every scholarship awarded from the fund is a new generation carrying forward the judge's principle. Merit and bond define character, not birthright. My revenge wasn't just my own personal victory, it was a societal statement that the entitlement of biology must yield to the documentation of love. The legacy is multiplying. My fight is now their future. Legacy is multiplying. I built a legal, financial, and emotional fortress around myself. The petition for legal severance was the moat, the $3.4 million was the treasury, and integrity was the foundation. The fortress is unassailable. The final verdict is peace. My biological parents are locked out forever, and the people I choose are welcomed in. That is the final, beautiful balance of the ledger. Fortress is unassailable. The signature on the severance petition was the most important I ever wrote. It was my final statement of independence. It said, "My life is my audit, and I reject your findings." I finally gave myself permission to be defined by the man who saw my worth, not the people who rejected it. The CPA's job is to ensure accuracy. And this final ledger is accurate. I am loved, and I am free. Loved and free. So, what defines family for you? Is it the balance sheet of biology, or the statement of integrity? Charlie's story is a blueprint for finding peace by defining your own family on your own terms. Now, tell me in the comments, if you could legally sever your ties with toxicity, what one principle would you use to build your new family ledger? Final thought. And that, my friends, is the powerful true crime story of Charlie Cole and the $3.4 million inheritance. If you were inspired by her fight for dignity, hit that like button and share this story. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the legal and financial secrets behind family feuds. I closed the door to my office, the sound a quiet click of finality. It wasn't just locking up for the night, it was locking the door on my past. The CPA's work was complete, the revenge was successful, not because it destroyed them, but because it built me. My life is now fully funded by the judge's love and fueled by the purpose of his legacy. I walk into the future without looking back. Built by love, not hate. My most valuable asset isn't a checkbook balance, it's the $100% confidence in my self-worth. I learned that entitlement is the greatest liability, and integrity is the only equity that truly appreciates over time. I carry the judge's principles as my ultimate portfolio. Every step I take is a statement of independence, a movement away from the shadow of their abandonment. Independence is my asset. The Judge Cole Integrity Fund is now bigger than the $3.4 million that started it. It's a compounding interest of kindness, paying dividends in human potential. The students we support don't just get cash, they get the judge's story, a blueprint for what a real family legacy looks like. The narrative of abandonment has been entirely overwritten by the narrative of purpose. Compounding kindness. The greatest lesson of the ledger? Every action has a consequence, and the consequences of love are infinite. The money served its purpose by buying me the final legal and emotional severance. Now, the rest of my life is dedicated to proving that the judge's faith in me was the smartest investment he ever made. I am the living, walking, breathing testament to his integrity. Love's infinite consequences. Charlie's saga, the CPA's perfect revenge, boils down to 5 essential life audits for you. Lesson 1. Documentation is power. The paper trail always reveals the truth. Lesson 2. Chosen love is ultimate equity. Blood is not collateral. Lesson 3. Integrity is non-depreciating. It's the only asset that grows forever. These principles are the true balance sheet of a worthy life. A worthy life's audit. Now, for the final 2 vital audits. Lesson 4. Define your own family ledger. Use choice, not genetics, to define your inner circle. Lesson 5. Justice is found in finality. True peace comes when you legally and emotionally zero out the toxicity. Your past does not have to be your liability. It is a lesson that can be turned into future capital. You have the power to close the books on toxicity. Zero out the toxicity. If Charlie's strategic financial revenge gave you the courage to confront your own toxic ledgers, hit the like button and tell me which of these 5 lessons resonated most with you in the comments below. Subscribe now to keep getting the best family revenge stories delivered with legal and financial precision. What chapter of your life are you ready to close forever? Ready to close the chapter?